My name is Colette, and I am 32 years old. The morning of my wedding, my father texted me 3 words that didn't make sense at first, like my brain refused to accept them in the order they appeared on my screen. We're not coming. That was it. No punctuation, no explanation, no follow-up. Just a cold little message sitting at the top of my phone like it had always belonged there. I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, my dress only half fastened, one earring in, the other missing somewhere in the chaos of makeup brushes and garment bags. My hands were still, but my mind wasn't. My maid of honor, Tessa, was across the room cracking jokes about how I looked too calm for someone about to get married, and my stylist was fussing with my hair, pinning it back with careful precision. I nodded at the right moments, smiled when they smiled, but all I could see was my father's name and those 3 words. At first, I didn't feel angry. I felt confused, the kind of confusion that makes you start bargaining with reality. Maybe their flight got canceled. Maybe there was a medical emergency. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe my uncle had booked them on the wrong day. I even considered for a wild second that my dad's phone had been hacked and someone was playing a cruel prank. The thoughts flickered fast, one after another, each one trying to rescue me from what I already knew. Because deep down, it wasn't out of character. Growing up, my family specialized in blunt dismissals, birthdays forgotten, achievements acknowledged with half smiles and quick subject changes. I learned early that affection was conditional, that praise was something you earned by being useful. Still, this was my wedding day, and some stubborn, hopeful part of me kept waiting for another message to arrive, something that would soften it, something that would explain it away. It didn't come. And then I made the mistake of opening Instagram. The first post at the top of my feed was from my Uncle Rob, a photo so bright and polished it looked like it belonged in a luxury travel ad. A gleaming white yacht anchored off the coast of Santorini, the water so blue it looked unreal. Sunlight hit the waves like glass, and the sky was that perfect postcard shade that makes you feel like you're looking at something staged. And there they were, my father at the bow with a champagne flute, sunglasses on, posture relaxed, like he was starring in a life he'd always wanted people to envy. My mother beside him in a wide-brim hat, laughing too hard. My sisters in matching sundresses, hair blowing in the breeze like they'd coordinated it. Cousins lounging on deck, bottles raised, smiles wide. Every single one of them beaming, not a trace of guilt anywhere on their faces. The caption froze me in place, finally free of the drama. No tags, no context, just a public declaration that they were glad to be anywhere but here, glad to be far away from my wedding, far away from me. Like my life, my love, my marriage was a burden they'd escaped. My throat tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't swallow. I stared at that post for a full minute before I realized my jaw hurt from clenching. There was no emergency, no surprise crisis, no, we tried. They had made a choice, and then they had celebrated that choice publicly, as if skipping my wedding was some kind of victory. Outside the suite, I could hear the faint hum of guests arriving, the photographer calling out names for pre-ceremony photos, the venue coordinator's heels clicking down the hallway, someone laughing in that bright, excited way people laugh when they still believe today is uncomplicated. Tessa knocked on the bathroom door and asked if I was ready. I told her I just needed a minute. I didn't tell her why. I didn't want pity. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want my husband, Ethan, to have to carry my family's cruelty on his shoulders before we even said our vows. So I did what I've always done. I swallowed it. I put my phone away. I walked out of that suite with my head high. I smiled for pictures. I greeted Ethan's relatives and accepted their warmth like sunlight. I laughed when someone made a joke. No one would have guessed that only an hour earlier I'd been staring at proof that my entire bloodline had decided to toast my absence from the other side of the world. The ceremony passed in a haze. I heard my own voice saying vows, felt Ethan's hands shaking slightly as he held mine, watched tears in his mother's eyes, and for a moment I almost let myself sink into the beauty of it. But my mind kept splitting in two. One part of me standing at the altar, the other part of me trapped on that yacht, replaying the caption over and over. Finally free of the drama. It wasn't casual. It was a message, the kind you post when you want people to know exactly who you're talking about without saying their name. They had turned my wedding into a celebration of excluding me, and the cruelest part was how familiar it felt. This wasn't the first time they'd shown me where I stood. The only times I ever got their full attention were when the family business needed me. That business was a charter company my grandfather started, later expanded by my father, and presented to the world like it was his masterpiece. In reality, it survived because I made sure it did. I was the one who secured contracts, soothed clients, solved problems before they became disasters. I knew the systems, the vendor relationships, the passwords, the financing schedules, the client preferences that kept them loyal. My dad loved playing visionary, but the day-to-day lived and died with me. And my family knew that. They just assumed I'd always keep doing it, like I always had, quietly, reliably, without asking for anything in return except the illusion of belonging. By the time we reached the reception, the hurt had shifted into something sharper. Not a tantrum, not revenge for the sake of revenge. Clarity. They wanted to be free of me. They announced it with champagne and sunshine, and a caption meant to humiliate me on the most important day of my life. So I decided, calmly, that I would give them exactly what they asked for. Freedom. And they wouldn't understand what it cost until it was already gone. By the time the reception started, I'd mastered the art of looking fine. It's a strange skill, pretending your world isn't tilting while you clink glasses and pose for photos. Ethan's cousins pulled me onto the dance floor. His aunt hugged me so tight I almost broke because it felt like everything my family wasn't giving me was pouring out of strangers who had decided I mattered. I laughed when the DJ played an old throwback. I thanked people for coming. I let them tell me how beautiful the ceremony was. And all the while, my phone sat in my clutch like a quiet heartbeat. I didn't want to ruin my wedding. Not for Ethan. Not for his mother, who kept squeezing my hand like she was proud of me. Not for my friends, who had shown up early and stayed late and loved me loudly. My family had already taken enough. So I waited. Around 10:45, after the cake had been cut and the dance floor had thinned out into small clusters of drunk joy, I excused myself like I needed a breather. No one questioned it. Brides disappear for a minute all the time. Bathroom. Touch-up. Something about shoes. It's the easiest thing in the world to vanish in a room full of celebration. The venue had given us a private room upstairs for storage and last-minute emergencies. Inside, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring after hours of music. Dresses hung on garment racks. Gift bags sat stacked in neat rows. A spare bouquet lay on a chair like it was resting. I shut the door behind me. Then I pulled out my laptop. I'd brought it on purpose, tucked into a bag under the excuse of wedding logistics. It wasn't even paranoia. It was habit. When you've spent your life being the person who fixes everything, you keep tools close without thinking. My fingers didn't shake when I opened it. That surprised me. I'd expected grief, at least a wobble, something human. But what I felt was a clean, cold focus, like my body had already made a decision and was simply catching my mind up to it. I logged into the corporate dashboard for the charter company. The login screen looked the same as it always did. Familiar, unthreatening, like a door I'd opened 1,000 times. Behind it was my family's entire world. The first thing I did was remove myself from the operating charter. Not a dramatic announcement, not a public resignation, just a quiet change in the system that stripped my authority cleanly and instantly. I revoked my own permissions and reassigned nothing. No replacement, no transition plan. I wanted the vacuum to be the point. Then I moved to the corporate cards. Our company had multiple cards tied to different departments: fuel, maintenance, client hospitality, emergency repairs. My father loved those cards. He loved swiping them like the business existed to fund his lifestyle. I froze every single one, not cancel, because that would trigger immediate replacement workflows. Freeze meant confusion first, then panic. Freeze meant calling banks, waiting on hold, verifying identities, and answering questions he wouldn't know how to answer. Next were vendor accounts. There were 2 suppliers that kept the company alive more than any marketing campaign ever could: fuel and maintenance. Boats don't run on branding. They run on diesel and parts and people who show up at midnight when something breaks. I locked down our fuel supplier portal, flagged the account for ownership verification, and set a compliance hold that required my personal confirmation to lift. The system asked me if I was sure. I clicked yes. I did the same with our largest maintenance contractor, the one who had been loyal to me, not to my father. The contractor had my cell number memorized. My dad barely knew his last name. Then I moved to the client accounts. This was the part that made my jaw tighten. There were a handful of luxury travel agencies and private clients who didn't book because of my father's charm. They booked because I never let things go wrong. Their loyalty wasn't to the family name. It was to the experience I created, the invisible net that kept the boats running on time, the crew trained properly, the complaints handled before they became scandals. I flagged 3 of the highest value accounts for irregularities. Not enough to accuse anyone of fraud directly, just enough to trigger a review, enough to freeze activity until a compliance officer cleared it, enough to stall bookings in the exact window my father would be counting on for cash flow. I could already hear his voice in my head, loud and offended, as if systems were supposed to respect him personally. Finally, I pulled my access credentials from the master list and set a requirement for 2-factor resets across administrative accounts. It sounds technical, it sounds small, but in a family business like ours, where my father liked to be the face and I was the spine, it was fatal. Because the problem wasn't that no one else could learn the systems. The problem was time. Time was what my father never respected until it ran out. I wrote my resignation last. 2 sentences. Effective immediately. All inquiries regarding operations should be directed elsewhere. No emotion, no explanation. I refused to give them anything they could twist into a story about me being unstable, dramatic, vindictive. I learned long ago that people like my father don't argue with facts as well as they argue with feelings. So I gave him facts. By midnight, the company was still technically alive, but it was paralyzed. The phones could ring. The website could take bookings. The marina could shine in the sun. But nothing would move without me. I closed the laptop and slid it back into my bag. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was flawless. My hair hadn't shifted. My dress still looked like a dream. I looked like a bride who had everything. And in a way, I did. I walked back downstairs and didn't miss a beat. I smiled at Ethan as if I'd never left. I danced. I hugged my friends. I let my mother-in-law pull me into another photo. I let people tell me I was glowing. They were right, but not for the reason they thought. I fell asleep that night next to Ethan, listening to his breathing slow into steady sleep, and for the first time all day, I let myself feel the ache underneath my ribs. It didn't break me. It just reminded me that I was still human. The morning after the wedding, I woke up early, before Ethan, while the hotel room was still dim and quiet. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a sweater over my dress's forgotten hanger, and went downstairs to the breakfast buffet because I needed something normal to anchor me. I poured coffee. Then my phone started ringing. The office landline, ignored. My father's assistant, ignored. Our senior captain, ignored. 3 calls in a row, back to back, the kind of insistence that used to yank me into action automatically. My thumb hovered over the screen out of reflex, then I pulled it back. I wasn't that person anymore. By the time I finished half an omelet, the calls turned into emails. Urgent. Vendor threatening to pause service. Corporate cards declined. Client account locked. Need your access codes ASAP. I didn't open a single one. I finished my coffee, went back upstairs, and slid into bed beside my husband like nothing was happening. Ethan stirred and smiled sleepy at me. Morning, wife. The word warmed something in my chest. Morning, I whispered. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, my family was still on a yacht, still posing like they were free. They had no idea the floor was already giving way beneath them. The first message from my father came late on the second day. No greeting, no congratulations, no acknowledgement that I had just gotten married. Just 4 words. What did you do? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked my phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because there was nothing left to explain. He wasn't confused. He was inconvenienced. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix it. Day 3 was louder. Calls started coming from people who never contacted me directly before. A senior deck officer, a marina manager, a vendor rep whose number I didn't even have saved. One message said bookings were being pulled. Another said a bank account was temporarily inaccessible. A third used the word critical in bold. I deleted them all. Day 4, the calls spread beyond the business. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged asking if I was okay in that tone people use when they really mean what the hell is happening. Another said my dad had been pacing the marina yelling into his phone so loudly that security asked him to leave. Someone else told me he'd been arguing with a bank representative in the lobby of a hotel like volume could substitute for authority. Day 5, my Uncle Rob texted. The same uncle who posted the Santorini photo. This is getting out of hand. Call him. I didn't reply. Day 6 was silent. No calls, no texts, no emails. That silence was worse than the noise, because I knew my father well enough to understand what it meant. He wasn't calming down. He was regrouping. When my father went quiet, it was because he was deciding whether to threaten, bribe, or bulldoze. On the 7th day, just after sunset, I was home in our condo, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea, watching the city lights blink on one by one. Ethan was in the other room on a work call, his voice low and steady. The day had been calm, almost deceptively so. Then the pounding started. Not a polite knock, not a doorbell. A fist, hard and angry, slamming into the door again and again. I didn't jump, I didn't rush. I knew who it was before I even stood up. When I opened the door, my father filled the hallway. He looked different than he had on that yacht. His hair was unkempt, his face red and tight, his eyes too bright in a way that told me he hadn't slept much. He smelled like stress and old cologne, like someone who'd been fighting fires all week and losing. He started yelling before I could say a word. Something about betrayal, about family, about how I had no right to do what I'd done. His voice echoed down the hallway, drawing curious looks from a neighbor's half-open door. I let him talk. I took a slow sip from my tea while he burned himself out. When he finally paused to catch his breath, I stepped back just enough to make room and said calmly, "Perfect timing." I didn't invite him in. I didn't block the doorway either. He shoved past me like it was still his right. I closed the door behind him, slowly, deliberately, not to trap him, but to make sure he understood this wasn't a public performance anymore. This was just the two of us. No audience, no applause. He stood in the middle of our living room, chest heaving, eyes scanning the space like he was looking for something to grab onto. "You think this is a joke?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The marina is calling me nonstop. Banks froze accounts. Vendors are threatening lawsuits. Clients are pulling out. Do you understand the scale of this?" I leaned against the kitchen counter and met his stare without blinking. "Sounds like you had a busy week." The words landed harder than I expected. I saw it in the way his expression flickered, just for a second. He was used to me explaining, defending, fixing. He wasn't used to indifference. He recovered quickly. "You're going to undo this," he snapped. "Tonight, or I'll have lawyers on you by morning." I smiled, small and tired. "Dad, you don't have lawyers. You have Dennis. Dennis handles traffic tickets, and once got you out of a parking fine because the clerk didn't show up. You think Dennis can touch this?" His jaw tightened. I walked past him to the cabinet and pulled out a thick black binder. I set it on the table between us with a heavy thud. "This," I said, "is everything." He didn't move, so I opened it for him. Contracts missing, required signatures. Payment records showing withdrawals that didn't match any approved expenses. Emails where I'd warned him that pulling money from maintenance budgets would cripple operations. Invoices for parts that were never ordered. Safety reports quietly ignored. I flipped to the back. "And this," I added, "is the client who doesn't know their payments were funding your vacations in Greece." I closed the binder and slid it toward him. "If you bring in lawyers, they get all of it. So does the IRS. So does insurance. And so do the clients you've been lying to." The room went quiet. He wasn't my father in that moment. He was just a man cornered by his own arrogance. "You're still my daughter," he said finally, like that word still carried weight. I shook my head. "Not the way you mean it." That's when he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. Inside was a check with my name on it. The number was large, intentionally so. Big enough to buy silence. Big enough to erase memory. Big enough to make most people hesitate. "You take this," he said, voice low, "and you walk away. We forget this ever happened." I stared at the check for a long moment, not because I wanted it, but because I wanted him to think I did. Then I slid it back toward him. "You taught me something," I said quietly. "You taught me exactly how much you think I'm worth." That's when I saw it. Fear, real fear, flickering behind his eyes for the first time in my life. 2 days after he walked out of my condo, the final act began. And this time it wasn't me making moves. It was the truth surfacing on its own. 2 days after my father left my condo, the story he'd been telling finally ran into the kind of audience it couldn't survive. The first call didn't come to me. It came to him. A luxury travel company that accounted for a terrifying percentage of our annual bookings released a public statement early that morning. They were terminating their contract effective immediately and pursuing legal action for breach of contract and misappropriation of funds. The language was precise, sterile, and devastating. It wasn't emotional, it was factual. And it referenced documentation I knew by heart because I'd been the one quietly compiling it for years, telling myself I was just being responsible, just protecting the company from itself. By noon, the marina was buzzing. A journalist who'd been covering the maritime industry longer than I'd been alive published a piece that didn't name my father directly, but didn't need to. It outlined years of inconsistent maintenance records, safety shortcuts, and financial irregularities tied to a charter operation that had grown too fast and been managed too loosely. Anyone in the business knew exactly who it was about. The article spread fast, passed around docks and offices with the kind of grim fascination reserved for public collapses. Then the insurers stepped in. 2 separate carriers froze coverage pending review. Boats without insurance don't sail. It's that simple. By the end of the day, the fleet was grounded, docked, idle, expensive sculptures tied to the marina like museum pieces. On day 3, the IRS opened a formal inquiry. By day 4, the company's name was being spoken in the past tense. My father tried to frame it as sabotage. He told anyone who would listen that I'd destroyed the business out of spite, that I'd frozen accounts and stolen on my way out. It might have worked once. He'd rewritten history his whole life, but this time, the truth had paperwork, timestamps, and witnesses who were tired of covering for him. Someone inside the company, someone I'd protected more than once, decided they were done being quiet. They leaked emails, maintenance logs, payment trails, not my binder, but echoes of it, enough to show a pattern, enough to prove that what was happening now wasn't a tantrum, it was a reckoning. Within 72 hours, the charter company was a corpse. The marina pulled our docking rights. Vendors walked away. Clients canceled. Crew scattered to competitors who had been waiting for the fall. The boat sat still, lines creaking in the wind, paint catching the sun like nothing was wrong while everything underneath rotted. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mourn. What I felt was clarity. I sent one last email to the board formally severing my position, then deleted every corporate account I still had access to. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't offer consulting. I didn't explain. I was done being the spine for a body that kept trying to break its own neck. Ethan and I packed a single suitcase each. I booked a one-way ticket to a coastal town 3 states away, the kind of place where the marina mattered, but no one cared whose family name was painted on the hull. Where people judged you by whether you showed up on time and kept your word, not by legacy. We left quietly. 6 months passed before I saw my father again. By then, my life had simplified in ways I didn't know were possible. I worked as a consultant for small, independent charters. Enough money to live comfortably. No theatrics, no pretending. My morning started with coffee on a balcony overlooking a harbor where the halyards clinked softly against masts. No urgent calls. No crises dressed up as loyalty tests. That morning felt like any other. I was halfway through reviewing a maintenance schedule at a cafe near the docks when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up, already annoyed at the interruption. It was him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, like it belonged to a man who'd lost weight too fast. His hair was thinner, his eyes tired in a way I'd never seen before, stripped of the confidence that used to fill every room he entered. "Colette," he said. Just my name, no anger, no authority. He sat without asking. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. He stared out at the boats in the harbor, watching them glide in and out like they were mocking him. I could see the memories flicker across his face, a time when he believed the water belonged to him. "I lost everything," he said finally. I nodded once. "I know." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was searching for a crack, a way back in. I thought, maybe we could fix it, start over. There was a time those words would have undone me, but that woman was gone. "You burned every bridge," I said. "Then you took a yacht to Greece and toasted the ashes." The line hit him. I saw it land in his shoulders, in the way his mouth tightened. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just watched the harbor, like it was the last place he could remember feeling powerful. When he stood, he looked older than his years. He didn't offer his hand. I didn't either. He walked away, folding into the crowd of tourists until he disappeared completely. I turned back to my coffee. The sun was warm. The breeze smelled like salt and diesel, and for the first time in years, my chest felt light. I thought it was over. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in bold block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an address, and 4 words written beneath it. "You'll want to see this." I knew the handwriting. It wasn't my father's. It was my cousin Jenna's. I didn't call Jenna. I didn't text her either. I just stood in my kitchen, holding that piece of paper, turning it over like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough. The address was in the city I'd left behind, down by the old waterfront warehouses, the part of town that smelled like rust and brine and things that had been forgotten on purpose. The 4 words underneath were written with deliberate pressure, as if she'd wanted them to feel heavier than they looked. "You'll want to see this." I packed a bag and drove. The trip felt longer than it was. Every mile pulled up memories I'd spent months burying: my father's voice, the Santorini photo, the binder on the table, the check sliding toward me like a bribe wrapped in ink. I told myself I could turn around at any point. I didn't. The address led me to an old boat storage facility near the water, a squat concrete building with peeling paint and a chain hanging loose across the main entrance. The side door was cracked open just enough to slip through. Inside, the air was thick with oil, salt, and decay, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes long after you leave. The space was enormous and dim. In the center sat 2 of our old company yachts, or what was left of them. Once immaculate, they were now shells, paint blistered and flaking, railings rusted, upholstery split open and green with mold. They looked like animals left to rot after a fire. I knew those boats. I'd approved their maintenance schedules. I'd fought for their repairs. Seeing them like that felt like a punch to the ribs. But the boats weren't why Jenna sent me. Along the far wall were stacks of boxes, waist-high, dusty, and unlabeled, except for the occasional Sharpie scrawl. I walked over and opened the nearest one. Inside were folders, contracts, receipts, thick ledgers stamped confidential. My stomach tightened. These weren't company records. They were my father's. Personal expense logs, handwritten notes, copies of wire transfers, trips billed to clients that were clearly vacations, cash withdrawals timed to emergency maintenance calls that never happened, and then the part that made my hands go cold: offshore transfers to an account in a country with no extradition treaty, neatly documented, signed, dated. This wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate, organized, enough to ruin him completely. I stood there for a long time, the sound of dripping water echoing in the cavernous space, my pulse loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to close the box and walk away, let the whole mess rot with the yachts. I'd already won my freedom. I'd already left. I didn't need revenge to validate that. But then the image came back, uninvited and sharp. My wedding morning. 3 words on my phone. A yacht in Santorini. Finally free of the drama. He hadn't just skipped my wedding. He'd erased me. Jenna stepped out of the shadows then, looking smaller than I remembered, older somehow. She didn't smile. "I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know," she said quietly. "He hid it here because he thought no one would ever look." "Why send it to me?" I asked. "Because you're the only one he's scared of," she said, "and because if I turned this in myself, he'd destroy me." I nodded. I understood. Driving away from the warehouse, the boxes still burning in my mind, I felt the weight of the decision settle into my bones. I could walk away and keep my peace intact, let time and decay finish the job. Or I could hand this to the people who didn't care about family loyalty, only facts and paper trails. 2 days later, I made the call. I didn't tell Ethan every detail. I just told him I needed to close something. He didn't ask questions. He trusted me enough to know I wouldn't do this lightly. The investigation that followed was quiet at first. Then it wasn't. Auditors, subpoenas, charges filed so fast it made headlines. Offshore accounts flagged, assets frozen. My father's name printed under words like fraud and embezzlement instead of visionary and founder. I didn't watch the news. I didn't need to. Months later, sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee and the harbor spread out below me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief. Finality. I didn't destroy him. I stopped protecting him. And in doing that, I finally protected myself.